Hello everyone, Alex here. The topic I wanted to discuss today was the phenomena of perception in politics. The military has this popular saying that perception is reality. Now that is generally assigned to fraternization. Fraternization is the label given to soldiers engaging in intimate relations when the military stresses an environmental professionalism. What does this have to do with politics? It's got everything to do with politics. Maybe not fraternization itself, but the phrase perception is reality. There are so many movements that preach for a political system, and many we have already discussed, so I do not want to go too deep into them. But a common theme I noticed between all the philosophers is the fact that every movement they preached is based off their perception. This can all relate to bias, but bias seems a bit too broad and not the direct factor. Here, I'll read you the definitions I got from Google. Perception: the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through the senses. Wait, hold on. I like this one better. It is also from Google, just under the other definition. Ahem. The state of being or process of becoming aware of something through the senses. Bias: prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. Thank you, Google. Bias associates with prejudice when many movements for political systems are not intending for the prejudice of another. Okay, maybe just a little bit, but that's not the point. The point is that it all starts with perception. You cannot have bias without perception. When an activist realizes something is wrong with a certain thing, let's say a discrimination against a subculture, whether it's the LGBT community, race, ethnicity, age even, the activist will perceive that discrimination is taking place and then advocates a movement. I have a few examples here. My main source is a textbook we used in class called The Politics Book, Big Ideas Simply Explained, aka Politics for Dummies, i.e. me. I do not want to go too deep into the people in the textbook since we should have already read about them, and if you still want to read about them, just read or Google them. Confucianism, founded by Confucius in the ancient political thought section. During his time period alive, a major event that happened was the Roman Republic was founded. His section is titled, "If your desire is for good, the people will be good," which does sum up what he boosted for. He was in China. Their period was known as the Warring States period, so the need for a strong government to be in place was a push all of China wanted, especially when they were having various troubles from rulers vying control over China. I don't want to go too deep into it, but Confucius was an educated, middle-class young man who pursued a career as an admin, and it was in this role that he developed his ideas about organizing the government. His political ideas were built by his perception of what his position and environment in which he was living in. Medieval politics: the ideology of realism with a focus of statecraft by Niccolò Machiavelli. Machiavelli didn't play around. Credit to Ian from my class for making these slides here, by the way. And there's a bit of history on the screen for you. Machiavelli didn't have any feelings when it came to what was pertinent during the time. The title in the book is "A Prudent Ruler Cannot and Must Not Honor His Word," which is exactly what he means. During his time, he lived in turbulent political times. Many of it was led under the power of the church, specifically the Christian world ruling or guiding the political systems, but then it was changing, morphing into a new era where the people can control their own destiny. Niccolò Machiavelli had first-hand experience in public office for the Florentine Republic as a diplomat, and just like Confucius many years ago, started to develop his perception by his environment and role in the chaos. If Machiavelli wasn't in the situation, more than none, he would probably be a little nicer, maybe. Let's talk Montesquieu. Just because I researched him prior and I wanted to make my life easier, but doesn't look like he was actually ever in the book, and I kind of forgot. But that's okay, because I have my cute little mini presentation here to help me out. I mentioned Ian and I, plus Anthony, created this presentation together. Here's a couple slides to give credit to Anthony's hard work. Montesquieu. His time period is labeled the era of rationality and enlightenment. He was a very scholarly man and lived in a time period where it prospered and flourished without too much chaos leading the government. So he had a bit of a clearer, less angry mind than Machiavelli, and yet it all related back to the perception of his stance within the world and how his environment affected him. Because of the calmer environment, Montesquieu was able to read and write many books, one being De l'Esprit du Roi, translating to Of the Spirit of Laws. He offered the idea of checks and balances in the government so as to reduce the amount of corruption leading the hearts and minds of people, especially when all of humanity is trying to promote morals. And if you look far, I would say, yeah. Tying his views back to perception, Montesquieu perceived the government as simply flawed in a sense that it was left unchecked. He did not live in fear or anger like the other two previous political philosophers, but his spirit was in every thought he perceived. Let's jump to thoughts. Revolutionary. In the beginning of this era, the American colonies demanded freedom from British rule, which eventually they did get. Let's move to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. His ideology was republicanism, and his focus was the general of free will. As an idiosyncratic Swiss exile from Geneva whose personal life scandalized polite society, proposed the most radical break from the past, actually. I mean, with his history, why wouldn't he? Perception. His perception was created from his time in the Italian island port of Venice, working as an underpaid ambassadorial secretary, that he decided everything depends entirely on politics. This was revealed in his autobiography titled Confessions that was published after his death. He believed people were not inherently evil, but become so under evil governments. The virtues he saw in Geneva and the vices in Venice, in particular the sad decline of city-states from its glorious past, could be traced not to the human character, but to the human institutions. Rousseau developed his ideology by his perception of his experiences and the conditions of his environment. Jumping forward to the rise of the masses, in this time period lived Alexis de Tocqueville. During this political era, there was a sweep of unrest throughout Europe and even in the US. Alexis de Tocqueville had his ideology of liberalism and focused on a classless society. During this time, there was a push for socialism as Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels published the Communist Manifesto. But Alexis de Tocqueville was not having it. He thought socialism was a new system of serfdom. Here is an excerpt of his life from De Tocqueville was born in Paris to aristocratic parents. When Louis-Philippe de Orleans came to the throne in 1830, de Tocqueville took up a post in the new government, but the political changes made his position precarious, so he left France for the US. The result was his most famous work, Democracy in America, in which he argued that democracy and equality had progressed furthest in the US. He also warned of the dangers in excessive individualism. After the 1848 revolution, de Tocqueville became a member of the Constituent Assembly in France, which was responsible for devising the Constitution of the Second Republic. He withdrew from politics after his opposition to Louis Napoleon Bonaparte's coup of 1851 led to a night in prison. He has always been exposed to the upper class, per se, of the government, so he pointed at socialism seducing the working class, but pointed out the flaws in socialism as a means to diffuse the movement. His intentions seemed to be for the better, but his role in society and exposure to different political systems influenced his perception on the matter and sought criticism to the rising movements of the working. And finally, the era of the clash of ideologies. Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi. A lot has happened during this time period. A lot of it was violence, with shockwaves of constant unrest. Surrounded by bloodshed, anger, and hatred, Gandhi went through a different approach, an approach to counter the emotions of the entire world. His background lies with his family being a prominent Hindu family in Porbandar, part of the Bombay Presidency in British India. Gandhi's father was a senior government official and his mother a devout Jain. Gandhi was married at the prime age of 13, and was sent 5 years later to study law. He practiced law by defending the rights of Indian migrants in South Africa, and it was there where he embarked upon a strict course of Brahmacharya, or Hindu self-discipline. Beginning of thus how he was raised, along with the intensive course, influenced his perception of the world, while guiding his actions and beliefs and hopes of peace. Perception is reality. Perception leads to bias. Bias lives in everyone's hearts guides the mind leads to actions reflect the politics. Therefore, it all begins with perception. What do you think? Agree? Disagree? Let me know your thoughts.